Hello everyone, it's the Ghost Saboteur, and this will be the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be dedicating to the Monome Teletype. The Teletype I've had for a few years now, and when I bought it, I have to be honest, I wasn't a proficient coder, and I kind of wondered for a while whether I'd made a big mistake in purchasing the module. And after a while of scouring the internet, I kind of got to the grips with the real basics and kind of started to see the advantages of this module. But I kind of wish at the time that I'd had some resource that really went over the really simple basics of the module that could have got me started a little bit quicker. So that's kind of the point of these videos that I'm going to be putting together in this series. So the module itself has really kind of become the basis of a lot of the patches that I put together in my Eurorack system, mainly due to its flexibility and the fact that I can come up with some kind of harebrained scheme patch for the Eurorack and go to the Teletype, and 9 times out of 10 I can put that idea together really simply. So these videos will hopefully help people who are perhaps thinking about buying the module to just have the module demystified a little bit for them, and hopefully just sort of demonstrate that you don't need to be a coding genius to make this thing work. So the videos themselves are going to be pretty basic, and with that in mind, if you're looking for something that's a little bit more advanced than the real basics, I definitely recommend you go away and have a watch of Joe's Teletype Talk video series. Joe is absolutely brilliant at explaining more advanced techniques in a really simple way, and his videos helped me an awful lot when I was starting out. Also take a look at the Teletype studies which appear on the Monome website. These are great as a starting point also. The manual is also an indispensable document that you might want to have a quick look at, coupled with the command reference, which is a list of all the commands available for the Teletype and a brief description of how they work. So in this video I'll be going over a quick overview of the hardware and the software side of the Teletype, which I don't really intend to be too heavy, but it's just stuff that you kind of need to know prior to going into actual coding. And the following videos in the series will be obviously a lot shorter, and the idea behind them is just really to provide a reference to people who are starting out with the Teletype. So hang in there, and hopefully my silky dulcet tones won't put you to sleep. I promise this bit will be useful. So taking a look at the front panel, we can see that we've got a pot, we've got the OLED display, USB socket down the bottom here, and then a bunch of connectors. This top section is actually split into 2 sections. We've got the input section on the first 2 rows, and then the output section on the second 2 rows of connectors. The input section has trigger inputs. We've got 8 of those. We've got a CV in, and we've got a pot which Monome call the parameter pot. On the output section we've got 4 trigger outs and 4 CV outs, which should hopefully be fairly self-explanatory. The OLED display is a 128 by 64 OLED display, and the USB socket is used primarily to plug in a keyboard so that we can actually program the Teletype, but it could also be used with a USB stick for saving programs. So before we get started looking at programming commands and all the good stuff, I want to take a quick look at the functionality and the basic concepts surrounding how you make this module do your bidding. I'll try and keep this section as short as possible, but having an idea of these concepts definitely will make coding the Teletype a whole lot easier going forward. So in its most basic form, the Teletype has 3 modes, and those modes consist of live mode, tracker mode, and edit mode. And these views can be toggled between using the tab key, as we can see here. But by default, the module boots in live mode. As the name suggests, live mode is great for anybody who is looking to use Teletype in a live performance situation. Live mode is the area of Teletype that allows us to manually input and execute commands and have something happen in real time. This could be sending a single command to the trigger output, for example, to trigger an external drum module, or you could use the CV outputs to send a CV voltage to, for example, a frequency cutoff of a filter. As well as running single lines of code, you can also use live mode to trigger larger blocks of code, and the larger blocks of code would reside in edit mode, which obviously we'll have a look at in a minute. So as an example of using live mode, I'm going to take a trigger output number 1, and I'm going to connect it to the Noise Engineering Basimus Iteritas Alta, the trigger input of that module, where we've got a kick drum sound set up. So in live mode, all we'd need to do now to get that to trigger is to put in the command tr.pulse space 1. And to execute that command, it's as simple as hitting enter. And if we want to resend the command, it's as simple as retyping it and hitting enter, and we trigger the kick. A really nice feature of live mode is the history, which can be accessed using the arrow keys, the arrow up and down. So if I hit arrow up, it will bring up the last command in the history, and we can hit return again, and we hear the kick. Obviously, if you type in lots of different commands, then they will be entered into history as well. So if I just do that now, using the up and down arrows, we can scroll through those and execute them as we wish. So next up is tracker mode, which harks back to the tracker sequences of the late 80s, sequences such as Ultimate Sound Tracker or Noise Tracker. The Teletype version is slightly different, but basically consists of 4 columns or banks, and each of those columns has 64 steps. And this can be used as a fairly standard sequencer, but it's also a really great way of storing data for the Teletype to use in its programs. I don't want to go into too much detail about the tracker itself. I think that's a subject for another day in another video. But it's a great feature of the Teletype, and we will go into it and the use of the pattern commands at a later date. So edit mode is where I personally spend most of my time when using Teletype, and it's the area of Teletype where we write our code using the Teletype command set. So for people who are new to the Teletype, here's a quick bit of Teletype terminology. In edit mode, a scene refers to the program as a whole, and a scene can be saved to internal memory. And when you do that, it saves all of the code that we have programmed into edit mode, but it also saves all of the tracker data as well. And within a scene, we have scripts, which are essentially individual kind of mini programs. And these will have up to 6 lines of code. And each of those lines can contain up to 30 characters. Now, when I first purchased Teletype, I kind of saw that and I thought it would be a bit of a disadvantage. It didn't seem like an awful lot of space for coding. But I soon realized this module with that limitation is actually a brilliant, brilliant thing. The other important thing to know about scripts is that there are 3 different types of scripts, and we're going to take a quick look at those now. So the first of the script types that we're going to look at is what I call trigger scripts. Now there are 8 of these scripts, and they're denoted by the number that you see in the bottom left-hand corner of the OLED. To toggle through the scripts, we can use the open and close square bracket key on the keyboard, and you can see we can toggle from 1 to 8. As the name suggests, trigger scripts are executed when a trigger is received at the trigger inputs of the teletype. If you remember, we have triggers 1 to 8 here on the front panel. If we wanted to trigger code in script number 1, we would connect a trigger to trigger input number 1, and every time that input received a trigger, the code would be run. So to demonstrate this, I think we'll do the same patch that we did earlier where we were triggering the kick drum. So we'll connect our kick drum to trigger output 1, and then enter the same line of code that we entered previously, which was tr.pulse space 1. And this time when we hit enter, the kick drum won't be triggered, but it will be added to the top of the script number 1. And that's it. Nothing else will happen. Until, of course, we add a trigger from our clock source to trigger input 1 and hit start. And then we hear the kick drum sound. So that's great, but just a bit boring. So what we're going to do is add some CV outputs to our patch so that we can change some of the parameters of the kick drum sound. And to do that, we enter the following code. So don't worry too much about the code for the time being. All this is going to do is send random voltages out of our 3 CV outputs of the teletype, which is then in turn going to change the parameters of our kick drum sound. So if we hit the clock start, you can hear that every time the teletype receives a trigger, each of the CV outputs will now send a random voltage and change the kick drum sound. So in addition to this, a useful feature of the teletype in edit mode is not only the ability to be able to trigger your scripts externally from an external clock or other clock source, it's the ability to be able to do the same thing from the keyboard itself. Again, this is quite useful for working in a live situation. And the way we do it is using the F keys on the keyboard. So F1 through to 8 corresponds to scripts 1 through to 8. And I can show you that now by hitting F1. As I said, this is really great for a live situation, but it also really helps when you're writing your code and you want to test individual scripts without every single script being triggered at the same time. Using the F keys is a really handy feature. So the next of our scripts is the M script, or the metronome script. And this is a script that Teletype repeatedly triggers at regular time intervals. The rate at which the Teletype triggers this particular script is set in code, and we do that by using a command M. So in the script window, in the metronome script window, if we type M, and then we follow it by a number which will represent a value in milliseconds for which Teletype will re-trigger the script. So in this case, if we want to re-trigger the script every 1 second, we would type 1000. If we hit return, nothing will happen. But in the background, Teletype is now running this script once every second. We just need to add some more commands to the script in order for things to happen. So if I was now to add the same command that we used in our live mode demonstration, which was tr.pulse space 1, and if I hit return now, we will hear our kick drum triggering every 1 second. And as I add the CVs, the random CVs in the same way as we did previously, you will hear, hopefully, changes to the sound and the parameters of the kick drum. Which is great. Now if we wanted to increase the speed, obviously the thing we need to do is decrease the amount of milliseconds that we're asking Teletype to trigger the script. So if we change that to 500 now, it will run at double the speed that it was before. Again, which is great, but most musicians that I know don't tend to work in milliseconds when working with tempo in their music. So Monome have given us a handy command here within the metronome command, which is BPM. We can now use a value way more familiar to us that we use, every day in our music. So in this case, I'm going to go 120 beats per minute, hit return. And now we've got a sequence running at 120 beats per minute. So the handy thing about the metronome script is that if you have a situation where you maybe don't have a clock source within your Eurorack, this can be used as your clock source at the same time as triggering other bits of code within Teletype to control whatever patch that you're working with at the time. There are several other uses for the metronome as well as being used as a clock source, and we'll get around to that in other videos. So the last of our scripts is the I script, or the Init script. And this script is much the same as the trigger scripts, but the difference being it doesn't have a front panel connection. And the reason for that is because the purpose of this script is to execute a piece of code within it whenever the scene is recalled. And what that means is whenever you load a scene from the memory of the Teletype, the code within this script will be run once. And this can be really useful for initializing or setting your patch to a default every time you come back to that patch. Now, that may be, for example, setting a cutoff frequency to a certain level, maybe setting the volume on a VCA to a certain level. It may also be setting a frequency of an oscillator, just to a level that you want it to be when you turn on the patch. Another example of how I use the I script is going back to what we were looking at in the M script. If we go back to the M script here, you can see we've set the tempo of the M script actually within the M script, which is fine, but a better way of doing it would be actually to take that script and place it on the I script so that whenever we load this patch up or whenever we come back to it another time, the metronome will always be set before anything else to 120 beats per minute or whatever rate we want it to be. This is a really, really handy thing when you're going away and coming back to scripts that you've been working on previously. Just as a little added extra to this script actually does work as just like a normal trigger script, but obviously it doesn't have the front panel connection, but you will be able to trigger it in the same way using the F keys, and the F key that you use for that is F10. So if you wanted to reinitialize your patch halfway through a tune or a performance or whatever, you can trigger this script via the F key. You can also trigger it in code, but we'll get to that at a later time. So a huge congratulations if you've made it this far in the video. I understand my monotone drone isn't particularly the nicest thing to listen to, but thanks again. If there's anything that I haven't covered in this video, or there's something you would like me to have a look at in future videos, please feel free to drop a comment down below. And if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free way of supporting the channel, and it'd be much appreciated. And hopefully see you in the next one. Cheers!